Welcome back to the Napoleon Hill 17 Universal Principles of Success. On this powerful program, we will be discussing and uncovering in great depth Napoleon Hill's Lesson 9, entitled Self-Discipline. We have a dynamic trio who really understand firsthand the power that comes with applying the principle of self-discipline as outlined by Napoleon Hill. So before we enter this session together, on behalf of the Napoleon Hill Foundation, it is our great pleasure and honor of introducing our distinguished guests. And they are Laura Stack, Jim Cathcart, and Dr. J.B. Hill. Laura Stack is America's premier expert in productivity. For over 20 years, her speeches have helped entrepreneurs, leaders, teams, and organizations improve output, lower stress, and save time at work and in life. She has been a lifelong fan of Napoleon Hill's work and teachings. Her company, The Productivity Pro, provides time management workshops around the globe that help attendees achieve maximum results in minimum time. Widely regarded as one of the leading experts in the field of performance and workplace issues, Laura has been featured on shows such as CBS Early Show, CNN, USA Today, The New York Times. She's also the best-selling author of many books, most recently, What to Do When There's Too Much to Do. Joining Laura is Jim Cathcart, and Jim is a Hall of Fame professional speaker and author of 16 books, who has shared the speaking platform and worked on committees and boards with Og Mandino, W. Clement Stone, both of whom had direct experience with Napoleon Hill. Mr. Cathcart has been the president of the National Speakers Association, received the Cavett Award, the Golden Gavel Award. He's been inducted into the Speaker Hall of Fame and has delivered over 2,800 professional presentations around the world. He serves on the advisory board for the School of Management at California Lutheran University and is an active civic leader in Southern California. Jim says, in 1970, as a newlywed, when I went to work selling mutual funds and life insurance, my manager, Dick Cross, gave me a copy of Think and Grow Rich. Jim goes on to say, I remember being intrigued by the hidden message elements of Think and Grow Rich. I kept reading and hoping to discover the secret to success, expecting it to jump forth with each new chapter. I was naive at the time that it only became clear to me after discussing the book later with his manager, Mr. Cross. Jim says that little I know that this exposure to Napoleon Hill would build a career in self-improvement, and I'd go on to write 16 books, and so I owe a great debt to Dr. Hill and those who guided him. Napoleon Hill blazed a path that has made many successful careers possible. And thirdly, joining us is Dr. J.B. Hill, who just happens to be the grandson of Napoleon Hill himself. He spent 26 years as an artillery officer in the United States Marines before retirement and pursuing other interests. He graduated from medical school at the age of 53, completed residency in family medicine, and practices in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Being a prolific student, J.B. has degrees in engineer, mathematics, and medicine. He also speaks internationally and throughout the U.S. Dr. J.B. Hill says, and I quote, when I was 12 years old, Napoleon Hill, my grandfather, placed a copy of Think and Grow Rich into my hands and told me to read it. But it wasn't until 23 years old that I had to read it again before the book allowed me to change my life. The book holds the recipe for success and can be used by anyone whether they understand it or not. I certainly did not understand it at first. That is why I think it is a recipe. So with that introduction, welcome Jim, Laura, J.B. to this program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you very much.
Well, it's a delight to have you, and we'll get right into the program of self-discipline. And when we think of self-discipline, what's the first thing that comes to your mind in terms of its definition and what you'd say was the essence of self-discipline? And Laura, since you are the lady amongst us, and the adage is ladies first, we'll go with you. How does that sound?
That sounds perfect. Thanks, Phil. Well, for me, self-discipline has to do with doing what you know you need to do, even if you don't feel like it. And this was one thing that I really enjoyed about Napoleon Hill's book, Keys to Success, and looking at this discipline. In fact, he talked about how most people act first and then think about the consequences later, and that self-discipline actually reverses that process. And how do you actually think before you act? And so I think that often we go with the task that we will enjoy the most, the one that seems the most pleasurable, or the one that's right in front of us, not based on what we know we need to do. So a very simple definition that I use of self-discipline is doing what you know you need to do, even when you don't feel like it. And Jim, I know we've had some conversations around this topic before, as well as JB. Do you agree with that definition, Jim? And how would you kind of add to that?
I do. As a matter of fact, the way I position it in my own speeches is I talk about self-leadership. And I say to the audience, if you can't lead you, please don't lead others. And I say self-leadership is the ability, as you were saying, Laura, the ability to get yourself to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done, whether you feel like it or not, and still do it very well. All of those elements matter. Getting yourself to do what needs to be done, that's one part of it. When it needs to be done, that's another part of it. And still doing it well, regardless of how you feel about it, that's the key there. Because some people, they'll say, okay, I can get myself to do it, but I'm just going to make a token effort. Token efforts don't count. So self-discipline, again, going back to Dr. Hill's book, it says self-discipline requires self-knowledge and an accurate assessment of your current abilities. And I've spent decades in the study of self-awareness. I wrote a book called The Acorn Principle that was specifically focused on that because the subtitle of that book is A Self-Guided Tour of You. And I think once we start understanding how we think, how we respond, what our habit patterns are, once we get in the habit of being objective about ourselves, then we can see ways to interrupt the patterns that are leading to negative outcomes and start cultivating one spider web at a time, cables that will hold us to our chosen discipline of doing the thing that we want to do.
No, that's fabulous. And when you say patterns leading to negative outcomes, what do you think about that, JV? What are some of the patterns that you see? Why is it that people don't have self-discipline? Do you see it very much the same as Jim and I have outlined here, or do you have different thoughts?
I agree with the definition that you both use. You basically have to motivate yourself in spite of a negative tendency to do something different. For example, dieting, or making an ethical decision, doing what's right, or confronting a fear. But self-discipline as a principle of success has to be turned into something different, something called a habit force. And the habit force is done by mind discipline more than anything else. It seems to be the link between the two. I would define a habit force as a tendency to do something without really thinking about it. Successful dieters, we keep telling them that they have to change their lifestyle, but we never explain to them what that means. How do you change your lifestyle? Stay on a diet forever? That's not what it means. It means looking at that piece of chocolate pie and not wanting it anymore. When you reach that state as a dieter, you've actually achieved a habit force that will lead you to success so you continue to maintain your weight loss goals. And it applies to any other goal that you have. I think Napoleon Hill once wrote about habit force. He said that mind discipline is the ability to take advantage of the brain's ability to rewire itself to achieve self-discipline and habit force. And it's achieved by thought. Napoleon Hill thought of it as using the conscious mind to enlist the subconscious mind to work for him. And it's what turns self-discipline into a habit force. And once you get the habit force, then you can't be stopped. We're saying all the same thing, but in different ways.
Yeah. I'd love to jump in on that because you've just opened a file of mine. I used to be fat. I grew up overweight. I was raised in the South, and I pretty much believed if it wasn't fried, it wasn't food yet. And, so
you're so thin, I can't picture that.
Thank you. Well, when I got married in 1970, I weighed about 185 pounds on a 5'9" frame. And within a couple of years, I weighed almost 200. I was 1/2 pound off of 200. And that was the day I said, I will not weigh 200 pounds. I refuse to be a person that's that heavy on this frame. And that became my overriding purpose, was to get away from that potentiality. And I knew how to diet because I had dieted many times successfully, but I always gained it back. And this was at the time I got into the field of personal development, started setting goals and studying Dr. Hill and others. And I said, I will become slender. I'm not going to lose weight. I'm not going to go on a diet. I'm going to become slender. And I set about developing the thought patterns, the relationship patterns, the lifestyle patterns of people who were slender. And what happened was I removed 52 excess pounds, got in good shape for the first time in my life, became an athlete, and have remained quite fit and trim for the balance of my life, and that was 1976.
And it seems like what I'm hearing you say, JB talked about this habit force and not thinking about it. So what you're saying, in essence, is that you now don't have to think so much about being healthy. In fact, your motive was so strong at one point, and you had to really engage your will. And at some point, that moved from having willpower to just something that kind of happened in your subconscious. It is who you are, and you had to first achieve that by thinking about it, by behaving that way on purpose, and I imagine it's very difficult. But isn't it then really a sign of maturity? I mean, JB, not in his age, but would you say that he kind of, I hate to use the word grew up, it's kind of like my 11-year-old son. It used to be when he was 4, one of his goals was to brush his teeth every morning before he went down to play. Well, at 11, I sure hope that's not one of his goals. I hope that he just brushes his teeth automatically. And so in the same way as Jim developed this habit force and now he doesn't have to think about it, is that thought process?
Self-discipline. It is a thought process. That's a sign
of that maturity, right?
Yes, it is. It's the product of having self-discipline either taught to him by your son, he was taught to it, or being acquired individually. We can actually teach self-discipline to our children by setting routines and keeping them to those routines until it becomes a habit for them, giving them financial goals and making sure that they work to achieve those financial goals so that they can delay gratification. There's a science out, it's been around for about 20 years, cognitive therapy, which is what psychiatrists will use to retrain people to rewire their brain so they think differently. They now understand it as neuroplasticity of the brain, where the brain can actually be rewired either in a positive way or in a negative way. That rewiring is what leads to the habit force. Napoleon didn't understand it, but he did understand that you were basically reprogramming yourself. I'll give you a good example of neuroplasticity at work. If you take a concert violinist and have him play a piece of music and wire his brain for magnetic resonance imaging, you can see what parts of the brain light up for the fingers of the left hand. If you then give that violinist the sheet of music that he just played and have him read the music to himself silently, the same parts of the brain will light up. And that's because of years of practice. He's put together the neuronal networks that allow him to do that. The same thing is true with professional golfers and basketball. They've wired themselves so that they can achieve a goal, and that's why achieving that goal becomes impossible to prevent, because the body is tuned to it, is redesigned until every waking thought is oriented toward that particular goal.
Yeah, gee, Jim, it's too bad that your brain doesn't know the difference between you thinking about running and actually doing it, eh?
Let me share a little story with you. In the Marines, I ran extensively. I used to run a few marathons. And I get up at 4:30. I was in Honolulu, actually Kaneohe on the island of Oahu. And it would get hot, and I had to go to work at 7. So I get up about 4:30 in the morning and run. I'd sleep in my running shorts and just get up, put on my shoes, and out the door and go run for an hour. Well, one day I got up and I was out the door running, and I'm running along the road next to the ocean, and the sun's coming up and the waves are there, and you can hear birds singing, and it's just beautiful out, and the light's coming up, and I look down and I suddenly realize that I don't have my running shorts on, I'm in my jockey shorts. Because my mind was so set to getting up, putting those shoes on, getting out. I'd wake up during the run. And that's habit force at work. It's not self-discipline. It took self-discipline to get to that point, but it was habit force that continued on, and that's what allowed me to be in shape and to run.
One of the things that I've seen in so many different contexts is that a habit is built, like I was referring to a strand in a spider web, that enough of them together would be as strong as a cable. It's the little tiny choices, and this could be the avoidance of something. Like yesterday I went to a movie where it showed an alcoholic dealing with his addiction. He was in a hotel room, and the adjoining hotel room had the door unlocked. And his hotel room had no alcohol in the minibar. The adjoining room, he discovered, had a minibar that was well stocked with alcohol. And so he went over to it, and he opened the door, and he saw the alcohol. Well, at that point, he could have made a choice, and didn't, of course, but could have made a choice to close that door and walk away, call the hotel and tell them, please come up and lock this door from the other side, to deny me easy access to it. Next thing he did was, when he opened that door, and he looked at those bottles, he had a choice to make whether to touch them or not. And then when he picked one up, he had a choice to make whether to open it or not. And when he opened it, he had a choice to make whether to put it back, and so forth. And there were like 11 decision points between him and the consumption of alcohol in that scenario. And if we look at our life choices on any subject that way, that's the way self-discipline is built. For example, when I wanted to lose weight, it was to first identify what are the things that cause me to gain it or sustain it, and how can I remove those from my day? In other words, not have candy in the home, or not go to the place where I always eat the things that are unhealthy, or not hang out with the people that cause me to smoke, or whatever the negative habit happens to be. If we make those little choices over time, we establish the new dendritic patterns in our brain that you were referring to earlier, and develop the beginnings of discipline that make us strong enough to go the new direction by habit.
Well, and I think it brings up a great point, Jim, because I think what you're mentioning and what JB said, to me, what it said is that often self-discipline is, of course, not the easiest path. It's not the most pleasurable path. It's not, in fact, something that we want necessarily to do, although JB would say running for an hour is good for him. You would say, the way that you diet is good for you, and I think we talk ourselves into these things. Same way with the alcoholic in the story you're mentioning, that we have to actually have these things not be tempting. No candy, or as JB said, wear your shorts to bed. And when we open the door, we're actually, in essence, talking ourselves out of it. And so what do we do, for example, if you don't want to do it? And I think it's those small choices each day, the 11 little choices you mentioned, because there's always going to be something, quote, good that we can do instead. I think it's a tendency of some people to say, well, take a to-do list you have today, these 10 things I need to do. Of course, it's probably more like 110, but if I had these 10 things to do, on that list that there are a couple that are really critical, right? That you should be doing them, but we talk ourselves out of it because, well, as long as I'm busy, right? As long as I'm in motion, as long as I'm doing these other good things, then in a way, it kind of keeps me from doing the things that are the really great outcomes because I feel like I'm busy.
Yeah, if you can put a piece of it in front of you, for example, a project to work on, if you could put the tools or the information for working on that project in a convenient place so that you have to deal with the thought of going ahead or not going ahead, that helps.
That's part of the goals that you establish for yourself to develop self-discipline. I remember I joined a gym to work out and bulked up one time, a long time ago, and I used to say, I don't have time to go to the gym. I don't have time. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And then my wife got tired of me talking about and bought me a membership in the gym. So then I had to go. And 30 days after I had to go, because of that membership, I wanted to go, and I found the time. Just like Laura said, I'd been finding reasons not to do it that were good reasons, but were not sufficient to justify not doing what I said I wanted to do, really. But they were all good things that I was doing.
You had a routine that then set you up for success, but it took you some time to talk yourself into doing what you knew you needed to do, and, of course, not to make your wife mad at you, but by a period of time, in which afterward it became something you wanted to do. I just wonder what that threshold is. Where does that actually cross over? I'm a runner. I ran for, 3 months when I first started running and absolutely hated it. And it took a great deal of time before I actually wanted to run and enjoyed it. And I wonder when people give up on themselves, on their goals, on what's important to them because they haven't allowed that routine and that force of will to move into something that they themselves now want to do.
In medicine, I see when people give up all the time, when they quit smoking or they quit dieting, generally they fail the first time and then they use the failure to justify continuing. I tell patients who quit smoking, so you had a cigarette, so why are you smoking today? Why didn't you have your cigarette and finish it and then go back on the wagon and keep on it? You had a piece of pie, so that was 2 days ago. Why are you still eating pie? Don't use the excuse of what you did 2 days ago to justify what you're doing today. And people will do that. They will do that. I quit smoking and gained 50 pounds. I'd rather smoke than weigh 50 pounds. I hear this all the time in patients who are justifying failure, by short-term failure. They justify long-term failure.
Ages ago, I smoked 13 consecutive years. It was a strong habit. I was smoking 2 packs a day, and I decided once to try to quit. And, of course, I failed because I was trying to quit. And that was the only time I tried to quit. And then a few years later, when at the same time I decided to become slender, I decided to become a non-smoker. And there's a difference between quitting and becoming a non-smoker. Someone who quits smoking is a smoker who's not smoking now. They still want to smoke. They still have all their smoking paraphernalia. They still think of themselves as a smoker. I decided to become a non-smoker. So I gave away the engraved lighters that I treasured that had been given to me by family members and friends. I gave away all the ashtrays, and I announced to the world, I'm a non-smoker. Yes. I'll never smoke again until I die. Never.
You burned your bridges, didn't you?
Yeah, I said a prayer. I said, Lord, it's all yours if I pick up a cigarette, so feel free to cash that check the moment I do it. And I have never, ever succumbed to that temptation because the risk is too great, emotionally, spiritually, and otherwise.
Go public with that.
Yeah, it helped. Peer pressure.
That's a really interesting perspective, Jim, because on the other hand, there are people, let's say, who are alcoholics, right? And they have to be continually reminded that they're alcoholics, even though they haven't drank for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. How would you explain that dynamic? Is that a powerful dynamic in the whole point of
they have
self-discipline?
created a physical dependency, Phil.
Right.
The physical and emotional both. But they've created a dependency that the pattern is so strong that it's not just the mental tendency, but rather there are other forces working in them. Like when I quit smoking for 2 months, I was absolutely physically miserable because breaking that pattern was horrible. But once I was beyond it, I realized that all I was doing was going through the recovery of an illness. With the alcoholic, they're recovering not only from an illness, but also a disability. And so that's why groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, where they go and they say, hi, I'm Jim and I'm an alcoholic, and the others identify with that, they create their public peer pressure moment, and they talk about their feelings and support each other. That's a powerful, powerful tool.
Well, that's a power of fellowship. There are 2 addictions that we have when we have nicotine and food addictions and other kinds. You have a chemical addiction and you have a psychological addiction. When we help people smoke, the chemical addiction is 6 weeks. 6 weeks your body's made the adjustments. You're no longer serotonin deficient. You have no stimulus to eat. There's no tendency to gain weight after that because your body metabolism is adjusted. But the psychological addiction can last up to a year. Now, everything you did when you smoked before, you associate with pleasure, taking a break with the girls, or an apple pie, a cup of coffee, a cold beer, or other activities. Everything you did for pleasure, you associated with smoking, and you're still doing those things. So they become triggers that interfere with your ability to control yourself and quit smoking. So those people, that psychological addiction is why people fail to discipline themselves and to quit smoking. It's far more powerful than the chemical addiction, far more powerful.
JB, those triggers that you mentioned, what that says to me is that, in essence, you're getting satisfaction from external factors or people or situations, or the fact that I would sit there with my spouse and we smoked together out on the patio while having a lovely conversation. So you're getting your satisfaction from that rather than the internal satisfaction as you're describing with the cigarette and giving that up, knowing that you're healthier, you're going to feel better, you're going to live longer. Those external factors, those people, are very, very powerful, and I think that it gives an opportunity to really have an excuse to be able to succumb on purpose, and we know that we should be self-disciplined, and those are those patterns that lead to those negative outcomes because we place more value, we place more worth on the external, what other people think about us, rather than what we think of ourselves. We want other people to like us, to want us, to be proud of ourselves. And the strength of that is overcome by our own strength, our internal satisfaction. It's kind of like in the workday, if you can be the hero, you know, if someone's having a crisis and someone comes in and they're screaming loudly about something and you can put on your rescue hat and dun-da-da, you know, and go off and save the day. Well, you might have stopped working on the very critical thing that you have, and actually now you have to stay late. You know, maybe you bought yourself a late night at work and now you have to stay late because you didn't get finished what you needed to do because you were so worried about pleasing this other person and appearing to be the hero, not to mention the fact that now you're suffering by not spending enough time with your family. Isn't it interesting how we can really self-sabotage like that, placing more value on other external things rather than our own self-love, self-worth?
That was something that was very much a part of my life because I grew up never expecting to be substantial enough to matter. I thought I'd be just another nice person that lived a normal, statistically average life and then died. It is laughable from this perspective, but at the time I thought I would be basically nobody. And then when it occurred to me through reading these materials that I could make a substantial difference in the world, that was a profound motivator for me. And so what I had to do was reprogram my entire concept, my mindset toward myself and my world. And I listened to the recordings of Earl Nightingale. That was where I first ran across some of Napoleon Hill's work because Think and Grow Rich was one of the recordings that Nightingale had. And I bought the entire library when it cost me a month's salary to do so, not a popular decision at home. And I listened like a maniac. I listened every day for at least an hour a day to those recordings, and I listened to them over and over and over and over to the point of absurdity until I had reprogrammed my own worldview and was thinking like an achiever, like a person that got things done that made a difference. And boy, what a profound life change from being a clerk at the Housing Authority expecting nothing much from life to being, as Laura was, president of the National Speakers Association and flying around the world like you, JB, giving speeches to large audiences at high fees and having people go home and talk to each other about your ideas. I mean, wow, what a difference.
I was just the opposite of the spectrum. I was arrogant and felt that I was going to have anything I wanted to. And it wasn't until I was 23 when I realized that it wasn't going to be that way, that if I was going to have any of that, it was going to be up to me. And that was when I was brought back to Napoleon Hill, is when I understood that I was going to be in control of my own destiny and nothing was going to be given to me. But you actually did something interesting, the reprogramming of your brain through listening to those tapes of what you were doing. I have a man, Joe Dudley. He's a wonderful man. He grew up a sharecropper's son, and he developed a $200 million empire selling door-to-door. Just a remarkable man. He's read Think and Grow Rich 300 times.
Wow.
So, yeah, told me that. I said, why? My granddad's book. Yeah, but why? Why would anybody read it 300 times? And he looked at me and he said, well, it keeps my mind straight. But it's like anything else. If you control your mind, you can control your thoughts. Self-discipline, what Napoleon Hill wrote, said it begins with the mastery of your thoughts. And if you can't control what you think, you can never control what you do. And that's what Joe Dudley did. He was controlling the way he thought about things and how he was going to approach the world that was stacked against him. And he did a remarkable job. Quite a guy.
It's kind of like the devil on the shoulder, angel on the shoulder. Sometimes we think to ourselves in our heads what the right choice is, and I think that's that critical juncture, that's that path. Like Hercules when he was faced with the two nymphs, virtue and pleasure, where they were each trying to con him into following them. And do you want to take this path of a harder or a glorious life, or no, follow me and have this pleasurable, wonderful life? I think we all know in our minds what the right choices are, and self-discipline is the application of what we know to be right on that willpower. It's acting. It's actually moving our feet then in the direction, because oftentimes we say to ourselves in our heads, oh, I really need to, right? But then we can talk ourselves out of it at the same time, and we don't actually do what we know is the right thing. And that self-control versus having that power is critically important.
I think the easiest part of that is the earliest part of that. When those little moments arise, if we make that first choice quickly and make it toward the good, then the other choices are going to be almost automatic, or at least a lot easier to make. But if we wait past that first juncture and wait for the next and the next before we go in the right direction, then we get continually weaker in our ability to assert that discipline.
A lot of times I'm faced with decisions, and of course I make decisions all day long, but personal decisions, ethical decisions, generally I solve them by finding out which one's the hardest to do, and that's generally the right one. And do what's the hardest to do. Because the other ones, the ones I want to do, they're going to be the easy ones. They're going to be the soft gratification ones. They're going to be the immediate gratification ones. They're not going to be necessarily the right ones. And as a general rule, if you do what's the hardest, that's always been my experience to be the best.
That immediate gratification, I think, is what people struggle with when it comes to the pull of that. I mean, let's face it, no one's ever left their office in recent memory in the last few years and said, I finished. We're never done, right? We like to get something checked off. I've actually known people who do something for that immediate gratification, and if it's not written down on a list, they'll actually write it down just so they can check it off. You know, that feels so good. I think we're driven to accomplishment because our work is never done. In fact, I was reading that when you check something off a list, you actually get a little squirt of dopamine in your brain. That's very pleasurable for the human psyche. But what I've found interesting in my life, that if I am just doing all those things for immediate gratification to feel some sense of accomplishment, like I'm doing something, that the pleasure I get from that ability to procrastinate on that hard thing is never as good as the pleasure that I get when I do make the right choice. You know, as Mark Twain said, eat a frog first thing in the morning, the rest of the day will be great. You know, when you do something that is really hard, as Jim said, make that tough choice first, how does the rest of your day go? Then it's great, right? Rather than leaving at the end of the day, and you just have this nagging sense of dissatisfaction that although you did all these things for that immediate gratification, you left that critical one, and you felt busy, but you don't feel good about yourself. That's been a really interesting discovery for me in my life.
You know, a recent book on this, The Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business by Charles Duhigg. I read that, and it reinforces everything we've been saying. It explains the process.
Jim, we talk a lot about, you know, addiction to food and the importance of staying physically fit and staying away from things that are detrimental. But what about our speech and self-discipline in that? I think Dale Carnegie said that human beings are creatures of emotion. They don't think logically, paraphrasing that. How does one go about regulating that hot button when somebody presses it? Things that seep into our subconscious mind, so to speak, and evoke an emotional response.
The words we choose, the words we allow ourselves to use, are a big part of that package. I mean, you can carry that back even to the days of the Bible. I think it was James in the Bible that talked about the tongue, the words that we say and the power they have. But words matter. Some people say, no, it's just semantics. Well, what is semantics? Meaning attached to words, meaning attached to sounds or symbols. So when a word is chosen, the meaning of that word is also chosen by default. So if a person says, I'm anxious to meet you, and they say it to me, I say, why? They say, well, I don't understand. I say, what makes you anxious about meeting me? There's no reason to fear. They say, no, I mean I'm anxious to meet you. I said, you mean you're eager to meet me? They say, yeah, what's the difference? Well, there's a huge difference. Eager is based on a positive anticipation. Anxiety is based on fear. So anxious is not a positive thing. Anxious is a nervous thing, right? And it's like when I'm doing sales training, I tell people, look, don't ever make cold calls again, and don't play the silly little juvenile game of calling them warm calls. Just make what they are, new calls. And don't ever close a sale, confirm the sale. Look it up. Close means to shut, finalize, end, cease, etc., exclude, whereas confirm means to make official, to begin, to commence is part of that implication. So use the word that's appropriate, not the word that's easy or habitual.
That's fascinating, Jim, because I think that the word that you used, even just being eager and anxious, those do trigger an emotional response. And if a situation has been difficult for you, especially in terms of self-discipline, you can take any situation. I think, too, it's the words not just that you use in your speech or aloud, but it's the words that you say to yourself in your head about that situation as well. If you hate bad drivers, there's always been bad drivers. There are now, and there always will be, as far as I know. And you know,
it's getting worse every year.
It's amazing. They cut you off, and if in your head you're always swearing under your breath to yourself in your head about that, well, that situation is always going to anger you. And so I think that self-talk, too, then, isn't that true, Jim? Not just the words that we use when we dialogue or have conversation. Can't we replace some of those words? Maybe the person's lost. Maybe their mother is in the hospital. How do we stop experiencing that immediate trigger? I think repeating some of those new phrases to ourselves and maybe get some help, finding someone to help you figure out some new words to replace in that self-talk.
I used to criticize the other drivers, cuss at them, whatever, and I caught myself doing it, and I said, that's a pattern of the person I don't want to be. How would the person I'd like to be respond to these people? And being a motorcyclist helped me because that helps me be more courteous because the alternative is to die. So I drive courteously, and if I see an idiot on the road, I say, God bless him, watch over that guy, and I back off instead of competing with him and considering that this was a testosterone throwdown, right?
This is my road,
Go back to a quote from Thomas Merton. He said, the thought manifests as the word. The word manifests as the deed. Deeds form into habit. Habit hardens into character. So watch your thoughts with care. And I say one step further. If you recognize that chain, thought, word, action, habit, character, thought, if you recognize that chain, you can also recognize that at any point in that process, you have the ability to interrupt the pattern.
There are two ways of thinking and make that choice consciously, and that is a self-discipline act within itself.
But the easiest way is right at the beginning, the thought. The individual, the movie you told about the man going next door to get his alcohol, the easiest decision of the 11 decisions he was faced with was not to open the door to the next room.
Right.
Because then he wouldn't have to make a decision. So your thought, word, deed, the thought is the easiest thing to control, and that's where we have to work at it.
How many times have we seen road rage because of lack of self-discipline? How many times have we seen a wrong word spoken that has destroyed a career or a contract or a poor decision or in a relationship, right?
Yeah, or you go to church and then battle it out in the parking lot on the way home.
By the way, going to church or to a regular inspiring venue is a big habit that makes a difference in a person's life, whether it's church or something else. That association with other people where you're talking about, even if it's a reading group or some kind of a mastermind gathering just of people that have chosen to become better people, and they get together once a week, month, year, and they talk about it, that reinforces this pattern and keeps you much more likely to stay on a good path.
Well, your subconscious mind is sitting there, and thoughts are how you imprint it. And the things that happen around you will imprint that subconscious mind. And you can imprint it negatively with your experiences and who you're with and what you're doing on one way, or you can print it positively the other way. And so part of what we should do is to put ourselves into an environment where we print it positively. Back to neuroplasticity, Franciscan nuns pray 5 times a day, and they've wired up a bunch of them and studied their brains. They also do this to Buddhist monks. And they looked at what parts of the brain light up on these nuns while they're praying, and it stays lit up for hours after they pray. And it's the prefrontal cortex. Well, the prefrontal cortex of the brain is that part of the brain that deals with peace and joy and forgiveness, and it's the last part that involved in human beings, and I think the last one that involves in boys, too. But in any case, that part of the brain developed in them, and it stays lit up for hours after they stay praying. The Dalai Lama sent 10 Buddhist monks to the United States to have their brain studied, and they do their meditation, and they, too, are glowing. That part of the brain lights up and glows and goes on for hours during the day. And again, it's imprinting and developing that neurocortex that allows them to do that. But it's their thoughts that help them.
And so, in a way, what you're saying, JB, is that things that are bad habits, I had to laugh, I'm sorry, about the boys. That's part of the brain for boys to develop. I have an 11 and 12-year-old boys. I also have a 17-year-old girl, but my 11 and 12-year-old boys, it's like fighting. I wonder now, I'm thinking maybe that's just a bad habit because one says something and the other says something and then it escalates and then, it's out of control, and they're imprinting that mind. And so because it's so habitual like that, they haven't really probably engaged that prefrontal cortex of peace and joy.
It's not matured in boys until they're past their teens. It really hasn't.
Oh, thank goodness.
It matures more early in females, but not in boys. We have a few more years to express ourselves in those ways, unfortunately.
I should just hang in there, huh?
Yeah,
hang in there.
That they don't have the mental equipment in place yet to do the pattern that you're requesting from them consistently. Then as a parent, you're able to be much more helpful and supportive. Whereas if you assume that from birth they have all the mental equipment to do all the things needed, then you tend to be much more judgmental and much more harsh in your judgment of whatever they do.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. Yeah. I think that as adults, we like to think we have the mental equipment to do the things needed, but it's amazing how many times you see exactly the opposite occur of what I think we all know, quote unquote, intellectually that should happen, where we know that we should be accomplishing things in order of priority, like what everybody's talking about here. But then when you look at people behave, it's fascinating. When you take, for example, an average inbox, maybe you have 1,000 emails in your inbox, and I've literally sat there and watched people sit in their email inbox all day and process emails as they come in. And when you step back and you say, do emails appear in priority order? No, well, they don't. But isn't it amazing how at the end of the day you can just go, wow, I didn't get anything done. And we know that we should not do that emails don't come in the order. It's like if you have a meeting and you go to that and you get a call and you handle that, and someone walks in your office and you handle that, and you get an email and you handle that. That's how you get to the end of the day. And you didn't actually get anything of significance, what JB referred to as that hardest thing on his list. So why don't we create boundaries like that? And that's one of the things I'm always fascinated at looking at. How do we prevent interruptions that are unnecessary? How do we develop those focus patterns? How do we really get that mental equipment, as you said, so that we do the things that we know we need to do? Then go, say, check our email. Is it because we're just getting a fleeting, is it like Christmas? Is it like, ooh, I wonder who's emailing me and we just can't stand it? Has this become almost another addiction, obsessive-compulsive email disorder? I mean, what would you call that? That really doesn't give us the ability to fight that.
Well, that's a great question, is why, and even perhaps more importantly, is how can we cultivate a system of self-discipline for our lives?
Right.
And to add to that, what are the important areas of our lives to consider when applying this principle of self-discipline? We talked about perhaps exercise, eating, speech, perhaps spending habits. Some people are spendaholics, you know. There's so many areas. Anyone like to volunteer and touch on that whole question?
That's something I used to deal with years ago. I was the director of, it wasn't my official title, but the position was the guy in charge of leadership training for the USJCs. They called me senior program manager. The JCs is the Junior Chamber of Commerce, and we had 350,000 members back then. So I was in charge of developing training programs for the individual development area. And we divided it into mental, physical, family, social, spiritual, career, financial, and I added another, emotional, on my own. So in my own self-development, I create a wheel with all of those as the spokes: mental, physical, family, social, spiritual, career, financial, and emotional. And I set goals in each of those categories. Emotional meaning, what do I want to feel or experience? Okay, and as I set goals in each of those, where I have to start is back to what Dr. Hill said in his book, and that is I have to start with self-awareness. I've got to realize where I stand socially, spiritually, mentally, etc., in the way that I'm cultivating the capacity of my mind or my relationships or my whatever it is, so that I can set appropriate goals and then start taking the little steps that develop the discipline. Like when I started on my physical fitness, my goal, the entire goal, was to every single day, without fail, rain, snow, sleet, or dark of night, to put on my jogging shoes and walk to the curb. Not to go run, but to be outdoors with jogging shoes on. And by doing that, I ended up jogging often enough that I got in good physical shape, took off the 52 excess pounds, and transformed my life.
Again, you established a routine, and you took little steps to achieve that routine, and it became a habit force for you.
Yep.
It's been said that we're motivated by either two things, inspiration or desperation. And in the large scope of life, which usually when we come to our knees and it's something desperate that needs to be changed, how can we change that so that we don't have to wait until things completely fall apart in an area of our life before we get moving? JP, do you want to take that?
I tell you, I actually used that quote I heard from you last time I talked to you, Phil.
Oh,
you did Malaysia, one of my speeches. I credited you, by the way. I was desperate when I decided to change my life, so did that inspire me to change my life? It gave me the impetus to do so. I really don't know. I think sometimes if you have to accomplish a goal that is life-changing, you have to be desperate. Now, you may luck out into it. I'll give you an example. I have some very unhappy friends who are PhDs and they teach. None of that teaching was any of the goals they ever had in life. They never dreamed they wanted to be cowboys or doctors or spacemen or something like that. But they didn't go up and say, I want to teach mathematics at the university. But they went on and they were successful and they achieved these goals and ended up fairly successful, but they were never desperate, but they were never inspired either. So I really don't know. I don't have a handle on it. I think that those of us that achieve great things, maybe it's because we started so far back. And so it only looks like you have to be desperate. But from my perspective, you need that as a motivation.
In your field, too, especially probably, JB, you know, when do you think about improving your diet? Well, when you've had a heart attack, or when do you think about lowering the stress in your life? When you've had a stroke, or when do you feel like working on your marriage when you're on the verge of divorce? And so I think that waiting to have the self-discipline until things get so cruddy in your life, maybe that is part of the crux of what sets successful people apart in this area of self-discipline, that they want to have a successful marriage, so they do the things that they know they need to do before they're actually forced to do it from some negative thing in their life.
But then there's always a Mother Teresa, the people that are inspired to change the world and to do something. Joe Dudley, I got off the plane with him. I rode back with him from Malaysia 3 years ago. And he got off the plane and he said, you know, when I get back, I'm going to call the governor. He said, we've got too many people in jail. He says, there are a lot of them, they still have light in their eyes. There are a lot whose light is dead. He said, but we got to do something. There's just too many in jails. This is a case of a very successful man that decided that he's going to do something about that, try to do something about it. He's become inspired. And Joe Dudley will do something about it if he says he's going to do it. So sometimes you get that impulse to do something great, and it's not from desperation. It's from motivation.
Would you say there's no such thing as a free lunch? If we can keep that whole thought in mind, that we think that we're making life easier for us by acting on our emotions instead of acting on integrity and what's good for us, that we pay for it on the back end instead of the front end?
Yeah, you're going to pay one way or the other. Pay me now or pay me later, with guilt and depression and bad health and et cetera. Yep.
Yeah. I think that it's like when we were in school and our professors gave us a term paper to do. It was September when you started the semester, and the paper's due in December, on December 8th. So when did you do the paper? December 7th.
And how did you rationalize it? By saying,
exactly.
I work best under pressure.
I work best under pressure. And I can't tell you, since my speeches are on performance and success and productivity, how many people say that they actually are almost addicted to this adrenaline. Do they get it done? Yes. But you knew back in September as a student that you really should be working on this a little bit at a time. And what happens is, as the time pressures go on, your stress levels rise, cortisol rises, you have more anxiety, your word, Jim, and also the quality of your work declines, and maybe you have 4 papers like that due. And so we know intuitively that this free lunch, we know that we're going to pay for it, but for some reason, now we're all, quote, grown up, right? Or are we? Here we are as adults. And you find people doing that same thing over and over and procrastinating, in essence, on doing the very things that they know are going to bring them more happiness, greater connection with their family, better communication, better work habits. And so I would agree with that expression. There definitely is no such thing as the free lunch. That self-discipline is more critically important than that fleeting pleasure, that instant gratification that GB mentions. And you are going to pay for it. Yeah.
Great. Well, it's hard to believe that our time together is winding down, isn't it? If if there was one takeaway from our conversation today on the lesson of self-discipline, the importance of, or the how in self-discipline, what would that takeaway be? And perhaps, JP, we can start with you and then go
I'd
around.
use Napoleon Hill's own words. He says that men search all their lives for power and fame without attaining either. He says they don't understand or recognize that the real source of both is within their own minds, and that mind discipline is the sole means by which the mind can focus itself upon a definite major purpose until the power of habit force takes over. So mind discipline is how you take self-discipline and turn it into a habit force. So I would leave it with that and say that the way to achieve mind discipline is the 6 steps in Think and Go Rich to achieve any goal. That's how you do it.
Beautiful.
I met a guy, I gave a talk in New Orleans at the arena next to the Superdome about a month ago. And I met a young man, a self-made millionaire in direct marketing, 28 years old. He got his first pair of shoes when he was 8 years old, learned to speak English by listening to motivational tapes by Napoleon Hill. Interesting man. And anyway, he told me that his business and direct marketing sales didn't take off till he really started doing the 6 steps of success. And so it's kind of the key for helping you take self-discipline and move on to a habit force using mind discipline. That's what I think.
Beautiful. And could you tell us what those 6 steps are?
Sure. The first thing is you have to have a definite goal of what you want to do in life. And then you write down that goal, and you write down the steps to achieve that goal, and then you decide what price you're going to pay to achieve that goal. And then you envision yourself already achieving that particular goal, and you envision yourself in possession of that goal. And that's what really programs your mind. You do this several times a day, and you review your list several times a day. And then, of course, the last step or the first step is you begin immediately, whether or not you're ready. You don't procrastinate. We talked about that earlier today.
Yeah.
Whether you're ready or not, you go after it.
Beautiful.
That's basically it. That's how you reprogram your brain. You use your conscious mind to control your subconscious mind to develop those little habits, as we call self-discipline, and turn it into a habit force.
Excellent. Laura, would you like to share with us one major thought or takeaway?
JB said reminded me of something that Napoleon Hill said in his book on Keys to Success, just about self-discipline, that it is about taking control of your mind, and that reminds me over and over to do what you know you need to do. I think we all know, and he said in the book that self-discipline is the process that ties all of the efforts together. It's personal initiative, it's mental attitude, it's enthusiasm, and even if you have to, what's the expression? Fake it till you make it. Act as if. Do what you know you need to do anyway, even when you don't want to. And maybe we're all just trying a little too hard. Maybe we're all just putting so much pressure on ourselves. We have to do it just right. We have to be perfect. And Jim just put on his running shoes and just walked to the curb. He didn't turn into a marathon runner, and not to worry about doing it perfectly, not to worry about getting it right, but to do it and to get out and to use and harness that energy, that motivation and the enthusiasm, and just lean on that for as long as you need to until it becomes what JB referred to as that force of habit.
Excellent. There's a saying that says, just do the next right thing. Just put your best foot forward. So
the single next thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's terrific. Jim, take us home, will you, on this
I'll do it.
Tremendous. Okay.
I have a model that I've used for years, and it kind of encapsulates all that J.D. and Laura have said, especially in the spirit of the way Dr. Hill originally positioned it. I say success must be made, and M-A-D-E is the acronym for this. M, mental picture. You've got to have a clear mental picture of your definite purpose that you want. What kind of person do you want to be? What kind of life do you want to have? What kind of outcome or different circumstance do you want to create? Mental picture, that's the M. A, affirmation. You've got to talk like that person, not like the person you were. You've got to talk in terms of the possibility of the outcome, not by playing silly games, just I think I can, or I know I can, those kind of things, but talk in terms that encourage the success rather than focus on the limitations. D stands for daily successes, meaning structure every part of your life so that you get a tiny little payoff in each one of them. For example, on my fitness, the walking to the curb with my jogging shoes on was enough of a payoff that it reinforced my ability to discipline myself to be a fit person. And over time, I could commit to a higher goal. I could not only have on my jogging shoes, but walk across the street to where the running path was. Or I could run to the first tree or the second intersection or the whatever. And so I finally got to where I was running 5 miles a day. And I had a 30-inch waist, and I was more fit than I'd ever been as even a teenager. So daily successes, whatever the category, find some little daily payoff, like forget to take your cigarettes with you. Whatever. Something that gets you closer to the status you want, which would be being a non-smoker as opposed to quitting smoking. And then the E stands for environmental influences. Your environment influences you a lot. The people you hang out with, the places you go, the patterns you reinforce, the place you sit in your family room, the convenience of the remote for your TV that encourages you to get back into the pattern of just watching another show instead of doing something more useful. Break the pattern. Structure your environment so that the environmental influences are in your favor. Middle picture, affirmation, daily successes, environmental influences, and ask yourself this question every single day. How would the person I'd like myself to be do the things I'm about to do?
Powerful, powerful. What tremendous insights from each one of you. And for those that want to learn more about the products and services that you offer beyond this tremendous program that we're offering the public, Laura, where can we find you?
My website is probably the easiest, which is theproductivitypro.com, or just laurastack.com works too.
Wonderful. And Jim?
Cathcart, CATHCART.com.
Wonderful. And JB?
They can reach me through the Napoleon Hill Foundation. They keep track of me pretty good.
Wonderful, which would be naphill.org. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you. On behalf of the Napoleon Hill Foundation, we just are so grateful that you've come to impart your wisdom and insights with us. And if I may add one little tidbit, if passion be what drives you, let self-discipline be the reins. Someone once said that. So I think that was well expressed, encapsulated through your insights. God bless you all, and thank you for being on the program.